pretty good indicators that that's kind of where your gut is heading towards, because those kind of things come into our mind unprompted. And so I can't speak for you, like how that would translate maybe to the work environment.
Yeah, I mean, you make a very good point of the frequency of these thoughts and these feelings and these experiences. The way that I like to think about it is everybody's human, right? Everybody's going to make mistakes. And in the interpersonal relationship communication, there's always going to be breakdowns. There's always going to be tension, disagreement, fights, because nobody's perfect. Nobody's going to be, no two people are going to get along 100% of the time. But is there an apology after something has happened? Is there repair? And are you seeing, and I think that this is the most important part, are you seeing a change in behavior following that incident, right? It's not, and I think we see this often in abusive relationships, whether they be at work or at home, that there is an incident that happens and there's an apology, and then it continues to happen over and over again. And so those apologies really quite meaningless. And so, you want to differentiate between human behavior and things that are going to happen because there are disagreements, and consistent patterns of abuse.
Mm-hmm. Yes, those are really great points to really kind of differentiate between the two. Like you said, we're human, we all make mistakes, but how do we respond when those mistakes happen? What do we do differently next time? Are we continuing to try to learn and grow, or are we just having these recurring fights about the same things over and over, which I've been there. So yeah, you're kind of just like in that hamster wheel where nothing is really changing. And life is too short to really stay on the wheel if you truly want to be happy. So just like kind of maybe sharing some of our personal stories a little bit. How did you know that it was the right time for you to leave? Did it happen instantly? Was it gradually over time?
Yeah. I think when you have an experience where there's sort of consistent bad behavior, it is easier to stay when it's sort of this like low grade that continues to increase over time, and you're almost sort of desensitized, rather. Yeah. And I think I have several toxic job experiences, but one that really mind is, having this boss who would repeatedly, to multiple people in the office, there was a huge high turnover rate. He would berate people publicly in front of the rest of the office. It was so tense all the time. And I was surviving it. I managed to not get fired when many people were getting fired. I managed to stay, it was like mixed, right? Like at some points it's like, you're the best thing that has happened to the company. You're my right-hand girl. You're everything that I needed, and we wouldn't be here without you. And then the next day it would be, you're terrible. You make so many mistakes. You're such a liability, all kinds of things. And I think that messaging can be so damaging too, right? It's like, you don't really know what to believe. There is a bit of gaslighting in that, of course. But I think one incident that really stands out in that relationship was that, this is a place where I used to walk to work. And there was a day where my boss called me and we had to be on call on our phones all the time. I would get calls from him late at night, early in the morning before I would go in. He called me one day and he said, take the train out to a coffee shop near my house. I had to, take a 30-minute train to get to him so that he could yell at me. And I just thought, I think that was the breaking point for me, right? I just can't do this anymore. I get that, right? Like there is this environment where like we have become like sort of close, like in a, I don't know, like trauma bonded
yeah.
sort of way. Yeah. Like that I considered him almost like a friend and mentor and all of that. But it got to the point where it was like, this is not okay. This is not normal. I demand not to be treated like this anymore. Mm-hmm. And not only am I not going to continue to accept this treatment, but I don't want anybody to be treated this way either. And so I really did kind of stand up for myself. And of course, after I left, I did sort of an exodus from other folks at my company who kind of said, you know what, like, this is a good example. Let's kind of get ourselves out of the situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good example of like, it was kind of both. It was kind of like a gradually building up over time. And then that pivotal day was kind of like the tipping point where you put your foot down and you're like, this is enough. Yeah. So personally, how I knew it was time to leave my marriage was kind of similar to what you're describing, in that it was a gradual process of becoming further and further detached and disconnected. What we had mentioned before, the recurring fights about the same issues, apologies, tears, things would be okay for a couple weeks. And then it was, anything that had changed would revert back. And I mean, when it got to the point where I no longer felt like bringing it up or having the argument, I knew that was kind of a big shift where it's like, because if you're fighting about something, it shows that you still care about it. And it was to the point where I was just like, this is pointless. It's not, this is not going to change. And so I'm just going to protect my mental health. I'm not even going to have the argument. I'm not going to bring it up. And in doing that, you get further and further detached and disconnected from the relationship. And so that continued to happen for a period of time. And then one day I woke up, it was a Sunday. I did not know this at the time, but it was a week before the lockdown in 2020 of March. But I didn't know that at the time. So I woke up and it was almost just like this inner voice. I don't know how else to describe it. Was like, do it today. Today's the day. I had not planned to do it that day. In hindsight, I wish I had planned it out a little bit more because I was really a wreck. And that's something that I help my clients do today is actually plan out this conversation, kind of what you're going to say the day. Because in my personal experience, yes, I'm glad I followed my gut. But I could have, what would have served me would be like, take a pause and like figure out how you want to say this. So similar to you, it was that gradual building up. And then one day just kind of woke up and I was like, you know what, I'm done. Life's too short. And then we were, quarantined together for a couple months. So what are you going to do? But, I never regretted, as hard as that even was, I never regretted the decision. So
yeah, I think you make a really good point that it doesn't have to be some kind of big blowout thing that marks the end, but truly it can be that straw that breaks the camel's back. You finally are just done. You're just not going to tolerate anymore. It can be both. And what you describe also is so important to remember is, you're dealing with something for so long and you're thinking, it might be better financially, culturally, societally, whatever. It might be better to stay. And then the moment you say, you know what, I'm done, I'm going to leave, there is that sense of relief. You can breathe and take that exhale and say like, whatever I was tolerating before is no longer going to be acceptable to me. And so we talk about that fear of what it looks like on the other side, but I think that also we sometimes downplay how much of a relief and that great feeling that you have on the other side as well.
Yes, that is a really great point. Because, when you make this type of decision to leave a relationship or a job, it's not going to be a walk in the park. There are going to be challenges that follow that decision, but you have that sense of immense relief when you make that first big decision because you made the decision and the world didn't end. Look, we're still here. Okay, so now like what's the next step? And you have more energy to face some of those challenges that are coming up down the road because you made that huge decision to start with and you showed up for yourself. Yeah. As far as making this decision, what would be your best piece of advice if you had to kind of synthesize it into something concise for your clients or anybody listening?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. Hold on, I wrote something down, so I want to look at what I wrote down.
Go for it.
What I wrote down is give yourself a deadline or a limit, right? I think that what can happen sometimes is that you do have that sense of comfort in the situation that you're in, and it can make it hard to take that leap. And so, maybe it's like a date where you're like, on June 1st, I know that I'm going to leave. Or maybe it's like, the next time that my boss calls me out to yell at me, either at the coffee shop near his house or in the conference table, in the middle of the office, that's going to be the end. And I've prepared all of these things beforehand, right? I've made my connections. I've started writing my resume. I've, if there is a case of bias or discrimination, I think you have a legal case. Maybe you are documenting all these things that are happening, but ultimately you have set a deadline for yourself. And beyond that, you're done. You're not going to stay.
Mm-hmm. I really like that piece of advice, holding yourself accountable. And that's something I've done with some of my clients too, of like, we set a date in the not so distant future of, okay, this is the day that by this day, we're going to have the talk, or by this day, I will have hired my lawyer. And it's okay if it doesn't necessarily go according to plan. If it doesn't, we talk about, okay, what got in the way of you making this happen and how can we learn from it, grow from it and set a new date. And that's why sometimes it's helpful to have a coach like us to actually hold you accountable to those deadlines. My piece of advice, it's kind of twofold. The first is that there is no magic formula or checklist.
I just lost your sound. I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't hear you anymore.
All right, I had a call come in, so then it went out. Okay, so I'll just start from the top. But basically, the best piece of advice I can provide is that there is no magic formula or checklist for making this decision. Yeah. So, you can make a list of pros and cons that can maybe help you find clarity. But at the end of the day, any sort of formula or checklist does not take into account human nature, our emotions, our intuition. And so everybody's decision-making process is going to be unique to them, is going to take the amount of time it takes. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The second best piece of advice would just be that you can trust yourself. I think, again, going back to some of those fears or the external pressures of society or family or religion, faith, creates these fears that if we step outside the box, we're going to be in trouble, or we're not going to be happy, or it's not going to go well. And so just knowing that at the end of the day, the only person who has to live with the consequences of your decisions is you. And so if a certain decision makes you feel good inside, and of course is not harmful to others, then you can trust that and you can move forward with that.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice.
So as we kind of wrap up this live, are there any sort of resources, whether your own or other books or podcasts, that you would like to share for people who are navigating the decision-making process of whether they want to leave their job?
Yes. So I have 2 free resources that you can find. Go to my Instagram profile at Connective Coalition, and you go to the link in my bio. You will see the quiz that I have called Should I Stay? I Go? And it'll put you into 4 categories. One being, sure, you should stay. And then there are a few options about, maybe you should stay in the same industry, but find a new job. Maybe it's you should, become your own boss and become an entrepreneur. So there are a few different options, but I think it's a great quiz just to sort of get a sense of where you are in this process. And is it just your particular manager who's causing problems, or are you kind of burnt out from a lot of different things? Mm-hmm. And the one is my workplace abuse survival toolkit. So my free toolkit, 20 plus pages of really a guide of how to move through this process. And, it is very supportive. It is kind of how we would start if you wanted to work together. But it's a very comprehensive resource. And if you do want to work together, if you are thinking about leaving your job, surviving through a toxic workplace, because one of the things that can be difficult, and probably with your marriage as well, is not just leaving the job, but getting that next one and not letting the impacts of the toxic experience color your next one. I'm available for coaching. I have coaching spots available currently. And if you go to my website, you can also book a free call with me, and I can tell you a little bit more about what it might look like to work together.
Amazing. Those resources sound so supportive and a great way to really dip your toe into what it looks like to work with you. And so those sound great. On my side, I have a guide for finding clarity and feeling more empowered in this decision-making process. It's called To Stay or To Split. You can access it at the link in my bio of my profile. And it's basically reflection questions and exercises that are really designed to help you make a well-balanced decision, look at this from all angles. Again, it does not have a magic formula, and anybody who says there is, I would seriously question them. But the goal is to help you have more clarity, feel more confident about this decision. And as far as working with me, I do have a program called Connected, and it is specifically designed to help you reconnect to yourself and do some of that inner work and exploration so that you can make this decision feeling confident. The best part is I'm not biased towards either outcome. I'm there to just help you make the best choices for you. So if the ultimate choice is to try to reconcile, I'm there to help you come up with a plan to make that happen. And if the decision is to move forward with divorce, I'm there to support you in making that next step. So there's no wrong answers. You can't lose or mess up the program. No matter what you choose is the right answer for you. So yeah, feel free to shoot me a DM or anything if you have questions about how to get started with that.
I love that. And I love that because you are a former divorce attorney, you can actually support people in moving toward that process of finding a lawyer and, going through the actual divorce. So what a valuable just resource that you have to support your clients through this process. I'm so excited to share this with the people who I know